What happens when the most powerful person on the plane is treated like she doesn't belong? A black woman in a crisp navy suit sits quietly in first class. She speaks calmly. She has a valid ticket. She doesn't argue. She doesn't raise her voice. Yet, within minutes, a flight attendant humiliates her, dismisses her, and ultimately slaps her in front of an entire cabin of silent witnesses. But what no one knows is she owns the airline. Why did no one speak up when they saw injustice unfold? Why did her presence trigger such fear and contempt? And how could one moment of cruelty spark a national reckoning? This is not just a story about one flight. It's about the unspoken rules of power, race, and silence. It's about how dignity isn't given, it's demanded, and how one woman's grace under fire changed the skies for good.
If you believe in justice, in courage, and in standing up when it's easier to stay silent, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to our channel, because this journey, it's about to take off. The boarding door clicked open with a soft hiss, and a wave of warm air swept in from the jet bridge. It smelled faintly of fresh upholstery and something citrusy, the way only new aircraft seem to smell. Flight EX-318 from Chicago to Seattle was on time, sleek, and already half full. Passengers in first class sat cocooned in cream leather, soft jazz humming above their heads like a whisper. Suits gleamed, watches flashed, voices murmured in low tones about IPOs and quarterly gains. Then she walked in. No loud footsteps, no perfume trail, just quiet confidence wrapped in a tailored navy coat, clean lines, and a calm presence that made people glance not out of curiosity but confusion. She didn't look like she belonged there. Elara Thompson moved slowly, politely, wheeling a small black carry-on in one hand, a worn leather laptop case in the other. Her shoes were polished but unbranded. Her curls were swept into a low bun. A simple silver ring rested on her left hand. No diamonds, no logos. She paused at the first seat. 1A checked her boarding pass again and gently set her bag in the overhead. From across the cabin, the lead flight attendant, Corinne Maddox, narrowed her eyes. She moved like someone used to authority, upright posture. Icy red lipstick, blonde hair in a precise French twist, and a pin-straight Navy uniform. She had already greeted the man in 1C, a tech CEO with a tan and a Rolex with sparkling champagne and a curated smile. But now, she watched Elara. Corinne took one step forward, lips pressing into a professional smile, the kind that always stopped just before reaching the eyes. "Excuse me, miss," she said, voice velvety but sharp-edged. "Are you sure this is your assigned seat?" Elara turned slowly. Her tone was gentle, measured, not surprised, not offended, just aware. "Yes, 1A." Corinne paused. Her eyes slid from Elara's ticket to her face, to her skin, then back again. The cabin air held still for a moment. Someone rustled a newspaper. A man 2 rows back cleared his throat. "Well," Corinne said too brightly, "we just like to double-check sometime. It's such a premium section." Her voice trailed off. No apology came. Elara nodded once. "Of course." She sat down, didn't sigh, didn't huff, didn't pull her coat tighter, just sat. Corinne lingered. She didn't ask if Elara wanted a drink, didn't offer a pillow, just pivoted and turned away, heels clicking softly as she walked back toward the galley. The silence she left behind wasn't empty. It pulsed with something unspoken. Across the aisle, the tech CEO gave Elara a brief glance, half sympathy, half detachment, then returned to his spreadsheet. Elara folded her hands in her lap, her breathing steady. The windows reflected the muted glow of terminal lights outside, blinking like indifferent stars. She was used to this. It didn't make it easier. In her mind,
She could still hear the words from a hotel lobby 2 months ago, ma'am. Housekeepers use the service elevator. Or the bank manager who had said, we usually verify large deposits before assuming you're the account holder. She had stopped counting those moments. Not because they didn't hurt, but because they came so often they blended into a kind of background static always there, just quiet enough to ignore until someone cranked the volume. She adjusted her seatbelt and looked straight ahead. The cabin had grown dimmer. Jazz faded into an instrumental piano. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and opened an email draft. Subject in flight incident preparedness review. Policy note, but she didn't type yet. Not yet. A small part of her had hoped today would be normal. Just another flight. Just a few hours in the sky. Her fingers rested still on the screen. The cabin lights dimmed further as the last few passengers settled into their seats. A steward announced pre-boarding checks over the intercom, his voice low and clinical. Somewhere down the aisle, a child laughed faintly. The sound didn't reach first class. Elara glanced to her left. Seat 1B remained empty. To her right, the man in 1C had slipped into a rhythm emails. Espresso. Investment calls, the kind of man who made silence feel like a competition. Corinne reappeared moments later, rolling her cart of welcome beverages. To the man across the aisle, would you care for champagne, sir? He nodded. Thank you. Corinne poured with precision, crystal flute catching the light. She even folded his napkin with a practiced flourish. Then she reached Elara's row. No eye contact, no words, not even the offer of a drink. Elara watched her pour for the passenger in 1D, then continue down the aisle as though seat 1A was invisible. Her lips pressed together. It would have been easier to say something, to call it out, to demand equal service. But Elara had learned long ago that power wielded too early gets dismissed as anger, especially when it came in brown skin and quiet strength. So she waited. She pulled a book from her bag, not to read, just to signal I'm not new here. I belong here. Behind her calm, though, the tension settled in. Not loud, not sudden, just heavy like humidity before a storm. Further back, Sadie Benton, the junior flight attendant, stood near the galley, watching. She was young, maybe 23, with soft features and big, uncertain eyes. This was only her 3rd month on staff. She knew Corinne ran a tight ship. No one questioned her choices, but something about the way she skipped over Elara didn't sit right. Sadie peeked at the passenger manifest in her hands. Highlighted in soft yellow near the top, Elara Thompson, seat 1A, platinum priority, security level 1. Sadie blinked. That status was extremely rare, usually reserved for federal officials, VIP dignitaries, or airline executives. She looked again. Could it be a mistake? She opened her mouth, about to approach Corinne, then stopped. Corinne turned and caught her eye. Just a glance, but sharp enough to slice steel. Sadie froze. The moment passed. So did her nerve. Back in 1A, Elara remained still. She watched Corinne chat warmly with a retired senator 2 rows down. The same woman who had studied her like a mistake in the boarding system. It's always the same script, she thought. They just changed the setting. Sometimes it was a hotel check-in, sometimes a business lounge. Now, a plane. What remained unchanged was the tone. That manufactured civility that asked the same question without ever saying it aloud. Are you sure you're supposed to be here? And Elara? She'd grown tired of answering. Across the aisle, Noah Greer, a senior software strategist at a mid-sized firm in Seattle, looked up from his tablet. He'd caught glimpses of the scene, nothing overt. Just small choices, subtle gaps in service, shifts in tone.
And the woman in 1A, she hadn't flinched once. He frowned. Noah was a second-generation Korean American. He'd built a career out of reading patterns, tracking algorithms, spotting flaws in data streams, and he saw one now, right in front of him. He didn't know her name, but he recognized what was happening. Still, he said nothing. He stared back down at his screen. The silence tasted like complicity. Elara turned toward the window. Out there, the airport lights shimmered in a grid of orange and gold. Planes taxied like sleepwalkers across distant runways. Somewhere out there, someone like her, quiet, accomplished, and underestimated, was sitting in another row, telling themselves to breathe. She took a breath, held it, then let it go. She glanced down at her ring again. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't flashy. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who cleaned offices at night, but still left handwritten affirmations in her lunchbox every day. You don't need to raise your voice. Just hold your ground. Corinne brushed by again, clearing empty glasses. Her perfume drifted through the cabin like something forced and expensive. Still no glance toward 1A. Elara adjusted her coat and closed her book. In her mind, the question echoed, should I say something now? And the answer returned, not as fear, but as calculation. Not yet, because she knew when power speaks too soon, it gets ignored. But when it waits for its moment, it reshapes the room. She was waiting, not out of weakness, but because silence was her storm, gathering strength. The plane began to taxi. A soft rumble vibrated through the floor beneath their feet, a signal that takeoff was imminent. Seat belts clicked. Overhead, bins groaned. First class settled into practiced silence, the quiet entitlement of people used to being carried, not questioned. But for Elara Thompson, the turbulence had already begun. Not the physical kind, the kind born of 1,000 invisible moments that wore you down like a tide-grinding stone. Corinne returned, her tone too bright, now artificial, sharp at the edges. Ma'am, she said, eyes skimming Elara again. Just a reminder, this area is reserved for priority travelers. Are you sure you're in the right seat? Elara blinked once, slowly. Her voice, when it came, was gentle, unshaken. I've already shown my ticket. 1A. Corinne crossed her arms lightly, lips pressed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We do get a few mix-ups. I'd be happy to help you find your correct seat, probably toward the back. Elara tilted her head. Are you suggesting I don't belong here? The question was soft, but in the hush of first class, it landed like thunder. From across the aisle, Noah Greer shifted in his seat. He looked up. The tablet in his lap still glowed, but he wasn't reading. He was watching. Corinne hadn't checked Elara's boarding pass. She hadn't scanned the manifest. She'd just made a decision, and that decision had nothing to do with logistics. 2 rows behind, a woman in a white blazer leaned toward her husband and whispered just loud enough to be overheard. Another free upgrade. I guess. Elara heard it. Of course she did. She'd heard versions of it her whole life. She must be a guest, not the actual speaker. She probably got in through some initiative. Are you sure she's the one in charge? She let it pass, but her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her armrest. Corinne stood firm in the aisle, waiting. Elara lifted her phone, calm as ever, and turned the screen toward her. Name Elara Thompson, seat 1A, boarding group priority. 1 status platinum executive bright. Clear, undeniable. But Corinne didn't lean forward to look. She waved it off with a flick of her manicured hand. I'm sure that's what it says, she replied coolly, but we have protocols. Her eyes swept Elara's outfit again, the minimalist heels, the absence of labels, the plain ring. You don't have a membership card, do you? There it was, the gatekeeping. Elara's voice never rose. She simply said, "I am on the manifest. My ticket is valid. That's all the proof I need." Around them, the cabin remained quiet, but now the silence felt heavier. A few passengers peeked over their magazines. Others stared into their drinks. No one spoke. Not yet. Because they all knew if they did, they might lose something. A deal. A favor. Their place in the hierarchy. Back near the galley, Sadie Benton gripped the passenger list in her hands. She had checked it 3 times already. Elara's name was there, in bold. With a security note beside it she didn't even recognize. She glanced down the aisle, heart pounding. Should she say something? Her lips parted, but Corinne's voice rang again, sharper this time. "If you can't show me your credentials, I'll have to ask you to move." Elara didn't blink. She didn't shift. She didn't shrink. "Instead," she said quietly, "I suggest you double-check your manifest before passing judgment." The calm in her voice made it hit even harder. Across the aisle, Noah exhaled. He'd seen it before, not always this blatant, but close. The way rules became suggestions when applied to some, and absolute law when applied to others. He thought about saying something, but the weight of risk, the unspoken politics of power, kept his lips sealed. Elara was alone, and yet she stood taller than anyone in the cabin, without leaving her seat. Corinne scoffed softly. Her smile returned plastic, brittle. "Well, I know who belongs up here, and I don't recognize your face." Elara looked up, full gaze now, not hard, not soft, just clear. Perhaps it's time the airline stopped relying on recognition and started relying on truth. That sentence. It stayed in the air like perfume, sharp, elegant, unforgettable. And, for the first time, a few passengers looked up, really looked. Not at her clothes, not at her skin, not at her seat, but at her. Back in the galley, Sadie Benton took a single step forward, then stopped. Her conscience screamed louder than her fear, but her feet still wouldn't move. Not yet. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Cruising altitude. A hush settled over the cabin like velvet. Somewhere in the back, a baby cried faintly, muffled by distance. In first class, the world remained untouched, or so it tried to seem. Elara sat still. Her trousers, though dry now, felt heavy, as if they remembered the weight of every time she'd been questioned. Across the aisle, Noah Greer watched the clouds roll past the window, but his mind wasn't on the sky. He glanced at Elara, then back at his tablet, which now sat blank. He knew what he'd witnessed. He just didn't know if he had the courage to say it aloud. Corinne Maddox returned with her drink cart, smile sharpened and voice rehearsed. "Another round." "Sir?" She asked the man in 1C. He nodded without looking up. "Scotch. Neat." She poured with a flourish, glancing down the row as she moved. Polished. Graceful. Professional if you didn't know where to look. She turned toward 1A, paused. Then, as if it were a favor, she asked, "Would you like anything?" Ma'am Elara met her gaze without a flicker of emotion. "A glass of water, please." Corinne didn't respond. She just turned back to the cart, her movements stiffer now. She poured. The ice clicked in the glass like a warning. Then, without warning, she shifted the tray subtly, precisely so that the edge clipped the toe of Elara's shoe. Not hard, just enough. 3 glasses teetered, 1 spilled. Water cascaded down, over Elara's cream-colored trousers, across her lap, and onto the plush carpeting below. A gasp rippled through row 2. The sound of ice on fabric. The sharp clink of glass. Elara sat, soaked, motionless. Corinne stepped back theatrically, voice rising not in apology, but accusation.
Oh dear, you must have put your foot in the aisle. How careless. She said it loudly enough for every seat in first class to hear. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Some passengers looked away, as if the discomfort might pass if ignored. Elara reached slowly for a napkin. Her hands were steady, precise, every movement controlled. She dabbed once at the water, then looked up, straight at Corinne. You did that on purpose. Her tone wasn't angry. It was truthful, and that made it far more powerful than rage. The cabin froze again. Even the hum of engines seemed to lower. A few rows behind, Sadie Benton clutched her tray, fingers white against the edge. Her heart thudded in her chest. She'd seen it all. The slight turn of the tray, the forceful nudge, the calculated spill. She looked at the passenger manifest again. Elara Thompson, Security Level 1. She looked at Corinne, then at Elara. She wanted to move, wanted to speak, but fear still rooted her in place.
Across the aisle, Noah's face shifted, not with outrage yet, but with recognition. He'd seen this tactic before, not on planes, in boardrooms, in fundraising meetings, microaggressions so sharp they barely left a mark, but designed to humiliate, to reduce, to remind, this is not your space. His throat tightened. His fingers hovered above the seat call button, then fell away. Say something. His mind screamed, but his lips were silent.
Elara slowly rose, not fully, just to adjust herself. She peeled her jacket off, revealing a crisp, pale blouse beneath. The water had soaked the front of her pants, but she stood like it didn't matter, like she'd worn worse burdens before. And she had. She turned slightly toward the aisle, her voice low but carried just enough to reach the row behind her. I asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else. No one answered, but the words didn't need a reply. They hung in the cabin air, undeniable, echoing off the leather and chrome. Corinne stood still, her jaw tight. She didn't respond. She couldn't, because in that moment her game had become evidence, and even if no one had spoken, everyone had seen. Back in row 3, the woman in the white blazer who had whispered earlier now looked straight ahead, her face pale, her mouth shut, near the galley. Sadie took half a step forward again. Her voice trembled in her throat. But still, she waited. And Elara, she sat back down, back straight, eyes forward, voice quiet. Not because she was defeated, but because her silence now had more force than any outburst. This wasn't just about a spilled drink. It was about a line being drawn in water, and it wouldn't fade, not this time. The water had begun to dry, but the shame lingered. Not on Elara. She didn't wear it. She refused to. It clung to the cabin itself, to the leather, the glass, the people who had watched and done nothing. Elara remained upright in seat 1A, her blouse uncreased, her hands resting softly in her lap. Only the faint shimmer of dampness on her cream trousers gave away what had just happened. She didn't glance at anyone. She didn't need to, because she felt it. The eyes, watching, measuring, waiting to see if she'd crack. She didn't, but they did. Across the aisle, Noah Greer leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He stared at his reflection in the glossy black screen of his tablet. What he saw there made him uncomfortable, not because of what had happened, but because he'd let it happen. Why didn't I speak up? He'd tried to tell himself it wasn't his place, that maybe he'd misread things. But those were lies, and he knew it. He'd watched a woman be humiliated methodically because she didn't look like what first class expected, and he said nothing. You're a strategist, he thought. You read signals for a living. Don't pretend you missed this one. Back near the galley, Sadie Benton stood frozen. She held a tray of glasses untouched, unnoticed. Her mouth had gone dry. Her eyes kept drifting back to the passenger manifest tucked into her apron. Line 3 Thompson, Elara 1A Platinum Exec Clearance Level 1, and next to it, a note she'd never seen before, Observe Confidentiality, Executive Visibility. Her heart pounded. Who was this woman? She wasn't just a VIP. She was someone who mattered, at the very top. But more than that. She was someone who had just been spilled on, sneered at, and gaslit all under Sadie's watch. Sadie closed her eyes for a moment and asked herself the same question echoing through Noah's mind. Why didn't I stop it? Down the aisle, the woman in the white blazer finally put her magazine down. She didn't open another. Her husband sat stiffly, staring at nothing. They weren't proud of what they'd heard her say earlier. They weren't proud of how quiet they had been, but still, they said nothing. Elara exhaled quietly. Out the window, the clouds drifted like silent witnesses. Above them, the sky didn't care about race, status, or assumptions, but inside this plane, every glance, every pause, every silence carried meaning. Elara had lived long enough to know the rules. Don't react. Don't escalate. Don't give them the satisfaction of saying you're emotional. But inside her, a slow burning ache. Not from humiliation, she had armor for that, but from familiarity. It's always the same. 1,000 cuts made of words unspoken. 1,000 spills dressed up as mistakes. 1,000 faces hidden behind etiquette, privilege, or fear. She reached slowly for her phone again, opened a blank note, then paused. What would she even write? Another flight? Another test? No. Too bitter. I kept my calm. No. That wasn't the story. Not this time. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed, "The most dangerous silence isn't mine. It's theirs." Behind her, Sadie took a step forward. This time, she didn't stop. The tray in her hand trembled slightly as she walked down the aisle. She passed row 2, then stopped at 1A. Elara looked up. Sadie didn't speak. She simply handed her a fresh, folded cloth napkin, her expression filled with apology and something deeper. Recognition. Their eyes met. And for a moment, Elara saw her, not as an employee, not as a bystander, but as a young woman caught between two kinds of truth. One taught by authority, the other whispered by conscience. Sadie opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Corinne appeared, and everything changed. Corinne's voice sliced the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Sadie, I don't recall asking you to deliver anything to 1A. Sadie blinked. I thought you thought wrong." Corinne took the tray, snatched it. "Really? Return to the galley, please, now." Sadie hesitated, but her body betrayed her. It turned. She walked away. Elara watched her go. No anger, just quiet disappointment. Then she turned her gaze back toward the window and waited. Because now the weight had shifted, no longer on her shoulders. It was on theirs, and it was growing heavier by the second. The engine hum softened as the plane began to cruise through smooth air. But inside the first-class cabin, the pressure had only just begun to rise. No turbulence from the sky, just from the silence. A silence full of judgment, complicity, regret. Corinne Maddox stood at the galley counter, wiping invisible smudges from her tray, her jaw clenched tight. She wasn't sure why she felt off. She'd followed protocol, hadn't she? Hadn't she? No one had stopped her. No one had questioned her, except that girl Sadie, and the woman in 1A. Corinne glanced at the curtain between the galley and first class. There was something about Elara's stillness that unsettled her. Something quiet and steady. Not confrontational, just resolute, unshakable. In seat 1A, Elara gently pulled the damp cloth napkin into her lap. Her trousers had mostly dried, but the memory of the spill clung to her skin. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't fidget. She simply sat, waiting. The calm wasn't performance. It was armor, built over years of being underestimated, misjudged, ignored only to rise again and again with truth on her side. Across the aisle, Noah Greer tapped his fingers on his tray table. 3 soft beats, like a code only he could understand. His stomach knotted. He hadn't spoken. Again, he told himself, there will be a better time, a safer time. But somewhere deeper, he knew this was the time. He just didn't know how to begin. A rustle broke the hush. Corinne had returned. Her heels clicked softly, deliberately, as she walked down the aisle again, her tray empty now. But her posture, it was anything but. She stopped beside 1A. The silence felt electrified. Elara looked up. Corinne's voice was cool, coated in the kind of sweetness that warned of poison beneath. "Ma'am," she began, "you've made quite the impression today." Elara didn't answer. Corinne continued, "We've had some concerns from other passengers." She paused. "Let that hang." Elara tilted her head slightly. Concerns about what Corinne leaned in just enough to invade the boundary of personal space. About disturbances, misunderstandings, possible aggression. The accusation wasn't overt, but it didn't have to be. Behind them, row 2 sat in frozen stillness. A man in a charcoal blazer cleared his throat softly, a guilty sound, but said nothing. Megan Sinclair, the woman in the white blazer, crossed her arms and stared at the wall. She didn't speak, but her face flushed. Elara leaned back, her voice quiet. "I've been spoken down to, denied service and soaked with water." A pause. "And now I'm being told I'm a problem." Corinne stiffened. She hadn't expected calm. She'd prepared for defiance, for complaint, for the attitude she was certain would come. But Elara didn't bite. She simply shone the mirror back. Corinne hated mirrors, especially when they showed who she truly was. The tension snapped. Corinne's face twisted just briefly, then smoothed into something colder than ice. She bent forward and slapped Elara. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tight, luxury cabin. Everything stopped. A gasp. A tray dropped behind them. The cabin turned, stunned into motionlessness. Every passenger froze. Every phone lifted slowly, shakily. Thumbs hovered above record. Elara did not flinch. Her cheek burned. But she didn't touch it. She didn't move. She simply looked up, gaze locked on Corinne. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through every soul on board. "You've just made the greatest mistake of your life." Gasps. A whisper. Silence. Then the crack of a moral line being crossed beyond repair. From the galley, Sadie Benton dropped the manifest folder in shock. Her mouth opened. No words came. But her tears did. In row 3, Noah stood. No hesitation this time. No tapping. Just a slow rise to his feet. He turned toward Corinne. His voice was deep, calm, and devastating. "You just assaulted a passenger in front of at least 10 witnesses. Are you aware of the legal consequences of your actions?" Corinne backed away, suddenly unsure of her footing. Her authority, once unshakable, now cracked like old glass. Passengers stared. Some whispered. Others pointed their phones. And Elara still didn't touch her face, still didn't blink. She looked at Corinne with the steady grace of someone who had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. From the shadows of first class, a new energy emerged. Truth, recognition, a reckoning. The crack of the slap still echoed in the silence. You could almost hear it settle into the walls, into the seats, into every breathless passenger who hadn't dared move until now. Elara Thompson sat perfectly still. Her cheek was red. but her eyes were calm. She didn't raise a hand to her face. She didn't ask why. Because she already knew. Across the aisle, Noah Greer remained standing, his hands loose at his sides. His voice came again, firm and unmistakable. "You just hit a passenger, on camera, in front of multiple witnesses." Corinne's expression shifted shock to denial, denial to fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Passengers were watching. Phones were recording. The hush in first class was no longer on her side. In the galley, Sadie Benton stood frozen. The passenger manifest, still on the floor, lay open at her feet. Her hands trembled as she bent to retrieve it. And there, again, at the top of the page, Thompson, Elara, Seat 1A, Platinum Executive, Level 1. Clearance beneath it. Executive Owner Access. Observe confidentiality. Sadie's breath caught. Her knees nearly gave. She whispered to herself, "She owns the airline."
Back in 1A, Elara finally moved. She lifted her phone with calm precision and tapped the screen. The text was brief. "Serious misconduct. Flight EX318. Immediate executive alert." She hit send. Corinne saw the gesture, and suddenly everything cracked. The illusion of control, the shield of her uniform, the quiet consensus she had always relied on, gone. Her voice came out sharp and trembling. You can't threaten me. I didn't know who you were." Elara looked at her, voice steady. "If I weren't the CEO, would you have treated me any better?" Gasps echoed through first class. Someone dropped a champagne flute. A young couple near the bulkhead exchanged wide-eyed glances. A woman clutched her pearls and whispered, "She owns the airline." Sadie stepped forward. Her voice wavered, but she made herself heard. "Elara Thompson is listed at the top of the manifest, Special Executive Code, First Class, Platinum Clearance." Another gasp. The tension broke, not gently, but in pieces. Passengers turned, some muttering apologies under their breath. A few bowed their heads in shame. Even Megan Sinclair, the woman in the white blazer who'd whispered snide comments earlier, now stared at the floor, jaw tight, cheeks flushed. Corinne took one shaky step back, then another. She looked at Elara not with contempt anymore, but with fear. Real fear. She stammered, I thought I was just following protocol. I didn't. I was only trying to." Elara stood. For the first time, she stood. Not aggressively, not theatrically, but with the kind of quiet power that fills a room. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Elara said softly. "I'm asking for the same dignity you gave everyone else." Her voice was like a quiet bell resonating long after the sound ended. "You didn't just humiliate me. You exposed yourself. And this system." At that moment, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice, deep and composed, filled the cabin. "This is Captain Reed Matthews. We have received a Level 1 executive alert. Flight EX318 is diverting to Hollow Point Private Airport for immediate review. Crew, initiate security protocol. All passengers remain seated." A ripple of shock swept the cabin. Red warning lights blinked briefly near the galley. Elara remained standing the storm in her now fully visible. Corinne slumped back into the jump seat, hands shaking, eyes wide. She knew what was coming. So did Sadie. Elara turned to the passengers. "I didn't want attention," she said, voice level. "I just wanted to get home." She paused. "But sometimes, home starts with reclaiming the space you were told you didn't belong in." The plane began to descend, early. Through the windows, the golden haze of sunset filtered in. And for the first time since boarding, no one looked away from Elara Thompson. They saw her,
not as a mistake in a seat, not as a disruption, but as a mirror, one reflecting everything they had ignored for too long. The plane dipped, just slightly, but it was enough. The tone of the flight changed in an instant, like someone had opened a window and the truth had finally blown in. The captain's voice echoed again, low and deliberate. "We are beginning an unscheduled descent into Hollow Point Private Airfield. Estimated arrival 14 minutes. All passengers must remain seated. Crew, prepare for review." The words weren't just procedural, they were prophetic. Elara Thompson remained standing at the front of the cabin, arms crossed gently, eyes steady. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to. Everything she'd needed to say had already been spoken through her stillness, her restraint, and the unbearable contrast to what had been done to her. She had exposed the truth. Now she would let the truth do the rest. Corinne Maddox sat hunched in the crew jump seat, her knuckles white against her thighs. Her perfectly pressed uniform suddenly felt like a costume. The mask she'd worn, confidence, authority, control, had slipped, and beneath it, fear. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the passengers filming her, the emergency landing, or the fact that she hadn't seen this coming. She didn't look like power, Corinne thought bitterly. She looked normal, unthreatening, forgettable, even. And that was the problem, wasn't it? She hadn't seen Elara. She'd seen a threat to the hierarchy she had built her entire worth around. A soft whisper broke the tension. Is she really the owner? A boy maybe 10 leaned toward his father in row 4. The father just nodded silently. No words. Because what could he say? Across the aisle, Noah Greer returned to his seat, but he couldn't relax. He felt both relieved and ashamed, relieved that Elara had finally revealed her truth, and ashamed that it had taken that much for people to see her. He looked at her, then down at his hands. Why did it take a title for them to care? That question burned inside him, because he knew the answer. In the galley. Sadie Benton stared at the closed curtain, her chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. Her internal warfare versus integrity had reached its climax. She hadn't spoken soon enough, but now she had. And it mattered. Still, her stomach churned. What would happen next? Would she lose her job? Would she be blamed by association? But underneath that fear was something deeper. Resolve. For the first time, she had chosen the right side, even if it came with risk. And that choice felt lighter than fear. Elara exhaled softly and returned to her seat. The pressure on her chest didn't vanish, but it shifted. Now it felt like motion. The kind that signals change. The kind that makes you tired and alive all at once. As she adjusted her seatbelt, her phone buzzed. A message from HQ. We've received the executive alert. Federal agents notified. Stand by. She read it, nodded slightly, and put the phone away. Outside the window, the golden horizon bent downward as the jet approached the runway. The sun looked like it was bowing, not to her, but to truth. Behind her, murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers whispered apologies they didn't quite know how to voice. Some looked away when she glanced in their direction. Others, like Noah, held her gaze and nodded not out of obligation, but out of respect, earned the hard way. Megan Sinclair's face was pale. She had shrunk back into her seat, the high fashion and perfect posture now paper-thin protections. She dared not speak. Because what would she say? She hadn't spilled the water. She hadn't thrown the slap. But her silence, her eagerness to assume, to mock, to exclude, it lingered heavier than any spilled drink. Truth had descended, just like the plane, and neither would land quietly. At the front of the cabin, Elara closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Behind those lids, The memories rushed forward. The conference rooms where she had been mistaken for the assistant. The investor meetings where her ideas were repeated by a man and praised as genius. The elevators that fell silent when she stepped in. She had carried those things, worn them like invisible armor. But today, she laid it down.
Because now they knew her name, not just the title, not just the manifest, the story.
And this was only the descent. The real reckoning would begin the moment the wheels touched down. The wheels kissed the runway. Smooth. But the mood in the cabin was anything but. A ripple of breath ran through first class, the kind people exhale only when something ends, or something big is about to begin. No one applauded. No one smiled. Not even the frequent flyers who usually bragged about how fast they could land. Everyone just watched. Out the window, blue and red lights blinked against the fading daylight. Federal security vehicles lined the edge of the private terminal. They weren't subtle. They weren't supposed to be.
In 1A, Elara Thompson unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, her blazer still immaculate, her posture still poised. She stood not with aggression, but with purpose, the calm center of the storm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scan the room for sympathy. She simply prepared to face what came next.
From the galley, Corinne Maddox peered out with eyes wide and wild. She gripped the wall beside the sink like it might keep her from slipping into the shame pooling at her feet. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't how the flight attendant script read. She whispered to herself, I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. But even in her own ears, it sounded weak. Because the truth was, she hadn't needed to know Elara's name. She just needed to have looked and seen her humanity. The intercom chirped, the captain's voice, now taut with gravity. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Hollow Point Private Airfield. Please remain seated as federal security boards the aircraft for a passenger incident review. Thank you.
No one moved. Phones turned on. Screens lit up. Silence stretched taut as piano wire. Then the door opened. 2 federal agents stepped aboard, 1 male, 1 female, both in dark uniforms, polished badges glinting. The male agent, older, steady, his eyes scanning without expression, took 1 step into the aisle and spoke. Miss Elara Thompson. Elara stepped forward with effortless grace. Yes. His voice lowered slightly. Would you like to file a formal statement? A pause. Every head turned. Elara didn't look at the other passengers. She didn't seek approval. She didn't ask permission to tell her story. She spoke clearly, each word like a quiet drumbeat of dignity. Yes, I am a black woman. I was slapped and publicly humiliated in front of dozens of passengers on my own airline. The agent nodded once. No hesitation. Understood. Please take a seat for the moment. We'll begin proceedings shortly. He turned. His gaze landed on Corinne Maddox. And this time, the voice was different, harder, sharper. Miss Maddox, please step forward. Corinne froze, her throat dry, her hands trembling. She stepped slowly into the aisle, the pristine uniform now looking like a broken shell. Passengers leaned slightly, watching, some pitiful, some satisfied, some simply absorbing the weight of what accountability looked like. Finally, the female agent moved beside her, voice precise, but not cruel. Miss Corinne Maddox, you are being detained for formal questioning regarding physical assault, breach of federal aviation conduct, and discriminatory behavior aboard Flight EX-318. Corinne's knees buckled. She reached for the seatback, steadying herself. Her eyes darted across the cabin, looking for anyone to speak up for her. But no one did. Not the couple she'd served first. Not the frequent flyers she'd fawned over.
not the woman she'd humiliated. Even Sadie Benton, still watching from the galley. Tears welled in her eyes, stayed silent. But it wasn't silence of surrender. It was the silence of letting truth speak without apology. The agent recited the Miranda rights, clear, calm, unflinching. As the silver handcuffs clicked around Corinne's wrists, the sound rang out not loud, but absolute, like a verdict. Corinne didn't cry. Not yet. She just whispered, as if Elara might hear, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." But Elara wasn't listening. Not to excuses. Not to regret that came only after consequence. As Corinne was escorted down the aisle, the passengers parted like water. Some turned their heads, others watched, unblinking. No one stopped the walk of shame, because deep down, everyone knew this wasn't just about a slap. This was about years, decades, a culture that let moments like this hide behind polite smiles and unspoken rules. Back in her seat, Elara folded her hands. Her phone buzzed again, a message from HQ. "We're ready. We support you. Full coverage. Full review." She nodded to herself, then whispered under her breath, "Let's finish this." Outside the plane, the last rays of sunlight bathed the tarmac in a golden glow. But inside, it was no longer about the light. It was about the shadows finally being named. The lounge was quiet. Not the usual kind of quiet, not luxury's hush. Not the hush of expensive coffee and velvet chairs. This was a different kind of quiet. A quiet full of aftermath. Full of echoes. Elara Thompson sat alone at the executive terminal lounge of Hollow Point Private Airfield. The windows glowed faint gold as the sun dipped lower outside. Inside. The light touched her face softly, as if the sky itself wanted to apologize for what happened in the air, but Elara wasn't thinking about apologies. She was thinking about impact and legacy. A tray of untouched refreshment sat beside her. She wasn't hungry. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that builds over years of carrying restraint like armor. She checked her phone. 200 messages, 98 missed calls, 11 voicemails from board members, and the top message, pinned from headquarters, full authority delegated, statement requested within 24 HRs. She inhaled through her nose, then exhaled slow and even. She would speak soon, but not yet, because right now she needed something real, not statements, not press, not spin. And just then, a soft knock, not at a door at the edge of her quiet. Elara looked up. It was Sadie Benton, still in uniform, though now it looked more like a weight than a badge. She stepped forward hesitantly, fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. I didn't mean to interrupt." Elara gestured gently to the seat across from her. "You're not interrupting." Sadie sat. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was respectful. "I should have spoken sooner," Sadie said quietly. "Back on the plane. When I saw your name, when I saw what was happening." She stopped, swallowed. Elara met her eyes. "You spoke when it mattered." Sadie blinked. "I was scared." "I know," Elara said softly. "I've been scared too." Sadie looked shocked. "You?" Elara smiled faintly. "Of course. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's just choosing truth anyway." Sadie's eyes shimmered. "I didn't know you were the CEO. I mean, I had no idea. You didn't act like power." Elara finished. Sadie nodded, embarrassed. Elara leaned forward. "That's the problem, isn't it? We think power has a look, a sound, a skin tone." She let that hang. Sadie nodded slowly. "It shouldn't take a title for someone to be treated right." "No," Elara said, "but sometimes it does, until we change what people see as power."
Across the lounge, Noah Greer appeared. He hovered a few feet away, unsure whether to approach. Elara saw him, nodded once. He stepped closer. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice a little gravelly from disuse. "I just wanted to say," he hesitated, "that I should have said something earlier. I saw what was happening, and I didn't act. I made excuses in my head, told myself maybe it wasn't my place. Maybe I misunderstood." He looked at her, eyes full of remorse, "but I didn't misunderstand. I was just comfortable." Elara didn't offer a convenient reply. She let his truth sit there naked, raw. Then finally, "Comfort has a cost," she said. Noah nodded. "I know. I paid for mine with silence." Elara stood slowly. "You still chose to speak. That matters. But now, let's make it mean something." Behind her, a digital screen blinked to life with the Right Skies Airlines logo. It was time. She walked toward the glass-walled conference room where cameras were being set up, where her legal team waited, where the press had been instructed to stay behind a line. And as she walked, others followed. Sadie, Noah, even some of the passengers, including the older couple from row 2 and a teenager who had filmed the incident and shared it online with the caption, "Silence isn't neutral." Elara paused at the glass door. She turned, looked back at all of them, then said, simply, "Come with me." Not because she needed them, but because they needed to see what truth looked like when it stood without fear. This wasn't just about one flight, one woman, one slap. This was about all the unspoken rules that had kept too many people small, and about the voices who'd stayed quiet but could choose, right now, to stand. The echoes of injustice don't fade on their own. You have to speak louder. The glass doors slid shut behind her. Elara Thompson stood in the middle of the conference room, not behind a podium, not seated at a boardroom table, but in the open, where everyone could see her as she was. Not a title, not a reputation, just a woman who refused to bow. The cameras flickered on. A hush swept the room and beyond it, the live stream waiting on thousands of screens across the country. Social feeds, news outlets, flight crew lounges, executive floors, airport terminals, everyone watching, everyone waiting, not for scandal, for truth. Elara lifted her gaze and spoke yesterday. "I boarded flight EX318 as any passenger might quietly, respectfully, ticket in hand. But before we ever left the ground, I was dismissed. Before the plane reached altitude, I was humiliated. Before the landing, I was assaulted." She paused, and still I did not raise my voice. Not because I was weak, but because I've spent a lifetime knowing that calm is often the only armor society allows black women to wear. Behind the cameras, several crew members wiped their eyes. In the lounge, Sadie Benton clutched a tissue. Noah Greer leaned forward in his chair, every word carving something open inside him. "My name is Elara Thompson. I'm the CEO and principal owner of Right Skies Airlines, but that should never have been what granted me dignity." She stepped forward. "Because the truth is, I should have been treated with respect whether I was a janitor or a jet owner." The room held its breath. Discrimination, whether polite or violent, is a poison, and it has no place in our skies or our society. Now her voice shifted, not louder, but sharper, like the cut of light through a cracked door. "Effective immediately. Right Skies Airlines will enforce the following: 1. A zero-tolerance policy for any form of racial, gender, or class-based discrimination. 2. Full accountability and transparency in every case, regardless of rank. 3. A retraining initiative for every single employee, not just customer service, but executives, investors, partners. 4. The launch of a 24/7 dignity hotline, monitored by an independent ethics board. She paused again, then added, voice unwavering. Let this moment remind us silence is not neutral. Silence is complicity. And from this day forward, no one will be punished for speaking up, only for staying quiet when injustice takes root. A swell of emotion filled the room. The camera crew lowered their heads slightly. One of them, a woman in her 50s, whispered, finally. Elara turned to the side. A glass plaque stood on a pedestal. She lifted it, held it high enough for the camera to frame it. This will be displayed in every Right Skies aircraft, lounge, and terminal, not as decoration, but as a reminder of who we choose to be. She read aloud the inscription, "You don't have to shout to prove your worth. But if someone denies your dignity, stand up, and the whole sky will listen." The line reverberated like gospel, a whisper of hope, a declaration of change. She placed the plaque gently back on the stand. Today isn't just about justice for me. It's about creating a seat at every table. It's about making sure no one ever has to earn the right to be seen. She smiled. It wasn't a performance. It was release. And somewhere in that moment, on a flight monitor in a classroom, on a phone screen in a break room, on a tablet in the lap of a bullied child, someone dared to believe they mattered. 1 week later, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Terminal C, Gate 28. The morning rush moved like a tide rolling suitcases, airport lattes, boarding calls echoing through bright hallways. And yet, the energy felt different now. Not louder, not slower, just cleaner. At the front of the first-class boarding lane stood Julia Kwan, newly promoted lead flight attendant for Right Skies Airlines. Her smile was warm, not forced. Her posture was upright, not rigid. Behind her, the crew moved with purpose. No favoritism, no whispering, no glances filled with judgment. Only standards and respect. The jet bridge extended as a boarding chime rang out. Julia looked up, and there she was, Elara Thompson, still in Navy, still calm, still powerful, not because of the title she carried, but because of the truth she never dropped. Julia stepped forward, hand over her heart. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson." Elara smiled. "It's good to be back." The flight was quiet, but not the strained kind of quiet from before. It was peaceful, the kind that comes when dignity has finally become the default, not an exception. In the row just ahead of Elara, a young boy, maybe 9, glanced back over his shoulder. He was black, bright-eyed, holding a model airplane. His mother smiled apologetically, but before she could redirect him, Elara leaned forward with a soft grin. "You like planes," he nodded. "I want to be a pilot." Elara handed him her drink napkin. Folded neatly into it, a handwritten message. "Never wait for permission to take up space." The boy beamed. At 37,000 feet, Elara closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. The fight wasn't over, it never would be. But something had shifted. She no longer had to prove she belonged. She simply was. Later, during landing, Julia offered her a final gesture. A hot towel, a handwritten card, and a look that said everything without words. "Thank you," Julia said softly. "For all of us." Elara touched her hand. "Just keep the sky honest." News of the reform had rippled outward like waves in the wind. Within days, airlines across the country began revising their codes of conduct. Training manuals were rewritten. Customers wrote in droves, demanding dignity everywhere, not just the air. And most importantly, people began to speak. One janitor in New York shared her story after being ignored for years. A single mother in Phoenix posted a video recounting her mistreatment at a luxury hotel. A barista in Atlanta handed out "Respect is a right" stickers with every coffee order. A movement had found its wings. And through it all, Elara stayed the same. Quiet, composed, visible not for her name, but for her impact. She didn't chase headlines, but headlines chased her. Months later, a bronze plaque was installed in the lobby of Right Sky's headquarters. It showed two women, Elara Thompson, standing at the front of a plane, unbowed, and Sadie Benton, standing beside her, not behind, but beside. Underneath, those with the power to choose, those with the courage to change. Elara walked by it every morning. She didn't linger, she didn't stop. But sometimes, as the early sun poured through the tall windows, she'd pause just long enough to whisper, "You don't have to shout to prove your worth. But if someone denies your dignity, just stand up, and the whole sky will listen." The sky. It was listening now, and it would never again be silent. She didn't shout. She didn't demand revenge. She stood calm, composed, unshaken, and let the truth do what it always does when you stop hiding it. It shattered the silence. Elara Thompson, the black woman once dismissed as an intruder in first class, became the symbol of a movement, not because she had money, not because she was the CEO, but because she chose to stand not just for herself, but for every single person who's ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Her quiet defiance became a thunderclap heard around the world. And what began with one slap ended with an entire industry rewriting its rules. But this story isn't just about airlines. It's about every place where prejudice hides in plain sight, in silence, in judgment, in the assumptions we never question. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who's ever been underestimated. And subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate quiet courage. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to make the whole sky listen. And next time, that voice might be yours.